Hello, and welcome to HNN Audio Story. Tonight, we invite you to step into a world where fear lingers in every shadow and whispers echo through empty hallways. This is not just a classroom, it's a place where secrets bleed and nightmares come to life. Are you ready to uncover the chilling mystery hidden within Red Blood Classroom? Then take a deep breath, turn off the lights, and let the story begin. Red Blood Classroom. When I opened my eyes, my ears were filled with chaotic warning sounds. Please get all students into the classroom by 7:45, or you will be lunch in the school cafeteria. The school loudspeaker blared so loudly that it hurt my ears, and the content inside made my hair stand on end. Turn students into lunch? What do you mean? Listening to the extremely chaotic broadcast, I couldn't help but be a little stunned. I glanced up at the wall and saw that the clock had pointed to about 7:40. But I was wearing a blue and white uniform. But haven't I been out in society for a long time, working for 7 or 8 years? I glanced out the window. On the opposite side there was indeed a tall classroom. The outside was painted red, as if it had just been painted, and was not yet completely dry. It just flowed down, but it was sticky, like it was full of fresh blood. With confusion, I went downstairs to check, slowly approaching the classroom. Beside me were many people who were confused like me. It was not until the bell rang that I carefully stepped onto the stairs. It's 7:45. I turned my head to look. The people who had not yet entered the classroom all turned into a loud noise, just popping and exploding together. The uniforms were also torn to shreds, flying into the air. Because I was so close, blood splashed on my face. Looking at the machines starting to collect the ingredients falling from the sky, I, who was originally a bit sleepy, immediately woke up. Lunch, this is really no joke. As soon as he entered the hallway of the classroom building, the announcement of the second round immediately rang out. It was the same ear-piercing sound. It seemed like it wanted to pierce the eardrums. All students are invited to choose their classes before 8 o'clock. Sit down and start listening to the lecture. Once school starts, anyone who hasn't entered any classroom becomes lunch in the school cafeteria. 30 seconds before the school bell rings, teachers will write their classroom rules on the blackboard. Please strictly follow the rules. Otherwise you will become lunch in the school cafeteria. Hearing the countless loudspeakers around me continuously repeating these 3 warnings, I felt my scalp tingle a little. Although I was still in a very hazy state, considering the horror of the bloody scene in front of the classroom earlier, I still decided to quickly follow. I don't know if I can live by following the instructions of the loudspeaker, but going against its orders is definitely a sure way to death. Wandering around the hallway for more than a minute, I couldn't find any patterns in the classrooms. All were half-closed doors, 30 neatly arranged desks and chairs, and a silent teacher who said nothing. Although the teachers' appearances and clothes were different, the expressions on their faces were strangely similar. They coldly stared down at the podium, not changing with any person entering or leaving. It can be said that the atmosphere of each room is extremely strange. Based on the loudspeaker's words, each classroom probably had its own rules. So most of the people were in the hallway constantly observing, hoping to choose the classroom that they thought was the best. I looked around a few times, and after confirming that they were all exactly the same, I gave up on the mystical idea of whether they were better or worse, and directly found the nearest classroom and sat down. Quietly sat at the last table at the edge, quietly waiting for the school bell to ring. But it wasn't until the 1-minute countdown to the bell rang that a group of observers entered one after another, pouring into the classroom, and very quickly all the seats were filled. Seeing that the clock on the wall had 30 seconds left, the teacher finally stood up, expressionlessly picked up a piece of white chalk, and began to write the rules on the board. The teacher's movements are very slow. Every stroke of the letter is so beautiful, it really looks like printed letters. It seemed like he had timed it right. Until the official school bell rang, he had just finished writing the last stroke and put the white chalk back in the box. When he turned around and left, We finally got a clear view of the entire content of the rule. Class rules. This class requires seating 5 minutes early. The rule just came out and caused the whole class to suddenly fall into panic. Because most people come in at the last minute. Perhaps it was because of the final struggle for the death. A tall and strong man suddenly shouted loudly, forcefully smashed the weak wooden table, picked up a sharp piece of wood, and glared fiercely at everyone. Why should everyone listen to this trashy teacher's rules? Let's fight him to the death. Then he picked up the piece of wood and rushed towards the teacher who was sitting still. The sudden chaos caused the classroom to be filled with screams from female students. But at this moment, the teacher's face had no expression. He just silently watched this scene, then flipped through the book in his hand. Sure enough, at the last moment when he was about to approach the teacher, the big man's body suddenly stiffened, unable to move. The loudspeaker in the classroom began to make a buzzing sound. Added a rule on student behavior. Students who attempt to attack or harm teachers will become a meal for the staff in the school cafeteria. After the speaker ended, there was a light lip-licking sound. We like food, strong but hasty like that. The tall man started to explode as soon as he finished speaking. Not only him, but all the people who entered the classroom at the last minute were blown up one by one. The sound of pop-pop kept ringing in my ears. I seemed to have witnessed the scene of a crimson explosion. Fresh blood flew everywhere. A few lucky female students couldn't help but lean on the table and vomit. I gaped as the machines entered the classroom and began to clean up. They worked very precisely, even deliberately placing the strong man's body in a separate bag. The teacher on the podium seemed to not see this scene, still calmly and naturally lecturing. And during these 40 minutes, the atmosphere in the classroom was almost suffocating. Finally, the bell rang to end the class. The teacher ended the lecture on time. The classroom door opened automatically. A breeze blew in from the hallway. The smell of blood was extremely strong. I felt scared but couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. From my observation, it seems that as long as we follow the rules on the blackboard, nothing will happen. Even if you can't understand the teacher's lecture content throughout the whole process, there is no problem. Just as I breathed a sigh of relief and walked out of the classroom building made a new announcement. Congratulations to those who are still alive. You can continue listening to the lecture. The school has a total of 3,000 students. After the first class ended, there were 800 left. I can tell that lunch in the cafeteria today will be very rich. Hearing this, my heart kept pounding. I don't know what the rules are in these classes, but this probability of death is a bit scary. Of course, this number probably also includes those who did not make it to the classroom building before 7:45. There is a 20-minute break between each class. Please don't waste it. You can relax in places like the schoolyard, cafeteria, gym, or chess room, and wait for the next class. This classroom building has a total of 9 floors, except for the 5th floor, which has the cafeteria and recreation room. The other 8 floors are classrooms. Please do not attend 2 classes on the same floor, otherwise it will become. As if to arouse our anxiety, he gently paused his speech here for a moment. But without him saying it, we knew what he was going to say. Lunch at the school cafeteria. Hearing this, I immediately started walking to the 2nd floor. When you get close to the first classroom on the stairs, go straight in and sit down, quietly waiting for the bell to ring. Because of my experience from the previous class, I didn't dare to sit down at the last minute. Even though I know each classroom has its own rules, I still feel a little scared. After waiting with difficulty for more than 10 minutes, the bell finally rang, and there were more and more people in the class. Of course, through the cruel elimination system in the first round, there were now less than 10 people sitting in the classroom. At the last 30 seconds, the teacher stood up in silence, took out white chalk and began writing on the board. Everyone held their breath, looking at the teacher's handwriting. Class rules. This class does not require. Just as the teacher was writing the rules, I heard hurried footsteps coming from my ears, the heels of shoes making a clear sound. Waiting until only the last 2 words remained, a figure that looked a bit disheveled walked into the classroom. The person who entered was a girl. Her face was still a little red from running so fast. She hurriedly ran into the classroom, almost falling. I held out an arm so she could hold on and stand firm, not falling to the ground. But right at this moment, the bell rang, and the teacher had already finished writing the last 2 words. She managed to enter the classroom smoothly in the last few seconds, breathing a sigh of relief and smiling at me. It was obvious that even though she was very nervous, she remained polite. But when I turned back to look, I found that the last 2 words the teacher wrote were expression. Class rules. No expressions in this class. I originally wanted to smile back at the girl, but suddenly my face froze. Then there was a terrible scream. The girl beside me was actually directly split in half. Bright red blood filled the corners of my eyes, and I was filled with fear. But seeing the white words on the blackboard, especially the 2 glaring words, expression, I realized that even though my muscles couldn't help but tremble, I couldn't be afraid. Absolutely not. Congratulations to those who are still alive. You can continue listening to the lecture. After the second period ended, there were 220 students left in the school. Honestly, you guys can already start looking forward to lunch today. After 40 minutes. Until that familiar voice and the bell rang, I was finally able to let out a sigh of relief. After witnessing that smiling girl being split in 2 right before my eyes, I didn't dare to have any expression, not even daring to move a facial muscle. During the long class, my whole face couldn't help but twitch. While I was still unconscious, I glanced around the classroom. There were originally more than 10 people sitting there, but now there were only 2 or 3 people panting nonstop. Wanting to hold on without changing color for 40 minutes is considered quite a challenge for one's endurance and physical strength. Especially when someone is exploding right in front of you. It's very difficult to do it completely without changing color. Still following the old rules. Each class has 20 minutes of break time. I hope everyone doesn't waste it. You can relax in the schoolyard, cafeteria, gym, or chess room to welcome the next class. Third period will start on time. Please do not take 2 classes on the same floor. The canteen's meat storage is almost full. 40 minutes of tension had left me extremely tired. I could only dreamily climb up to the 3rd floor, randomly find a live class and lie down on the bed. It was not until the bell was about to ring that I suddenly woke up. As soon as I raised my head, what I didn't expect was that there were nearly 20 people gathered in the class. I sat by the window and looked around. Sure enough, most of the classrooms were empty, with only 1 or 2 people sitting around. With such a terrible chance of being eliminated, this class almost completely filled more than half of the students on the 3 floors. In a state of panic, most people find it hard to avoid wanting to get close to a crowd, to find warmth. It was time. The teacher on the podium stood up on time, took a piece of white chalk and quickly wrote the classroom rules. Although rushed, he was still careful and precise like a robot. Classroom rules. During the lecture in this class, the entire process must be carried out by beating the flower drum. After the class begins, the teacher will give a knife to the student closest to the podium, who can choose any direction to continue the transmission. The teacher lowers his head to lecture, inviting the students to continue transmitting, not stopping for more than 3 seconds. When the teacher's voice stops, when raising his head, the person holding the knife must within 3 seconds make a cut on himself. Otherwise he will be eliminated. While I was still holding back my sleepiness to read silently, the teacher's voice followed the bell and the class started. The first student to receive it didn't even need 3 seconds, and after receiving it, he quickly threw it on the table behind him. Obviously he has a very clear resistance and fear towards the matter of cutting a line. Because the force was too strong, the knife even rotated slightly on the table, almost tearing the back of the hand of the classmate at the second table. Everyone who saw this scene couldn't help but hold their breath. This is only the first round of this class. Don't make mistakes so quickly." Fortunately, the second student was much bolder. He quickly grabbed the rotating knife handle and sent the knife 3 seconds ahead. The third student was obviously much calmer. After receiving the knife, he turned around to look at everyone, coldly raised his finger, and after counting to 2, leisurely handed the knife to the fourth student. This is definitely a role model for everyone. This class lasted for 40 minutes. Everyone maintained their composure, trying their best to prolong the time so they could preserve their best physical strength. Counting to 3 seconds is risky, so counting to 2 seconds is the safest way. The next few people all followed his example, trying their best to last 2 seconds before taking out their knives. The class, which was originally in chaos, became relatively orderly. And I'm on the 6th turn. I was originally prepared to imitate his appearance and coldly count to 2 seconds. But something I didn't expect suddenly happened. Just as I received the knife, the teacher who was lecturing so enthusiastically that he was spitting suddenly raised his head. His pupils were black and deep, staring straight at me. The noise suddenly stopped. I was stunned. Even though I had read the rules 3 times, I was still bewildered at that moment. I didn't expect that the first person to face the teacher and raise his head would be me. Panic suddenly rose in my heart. My hands couldn't help but shake, and I let the knife fall on the table. Quickly recovered, extremely nervous in the heart, wanting to find the knife handle position. But just as I was on the brink of despair, a light flashed across my face. But a middle-aged man wearing thick glasses grabbed it before me, holding a knife and slashing a line on my arm. This knife blade was sharper than I imagined. A lot of blood flowed out. The pain was quite obvious. I almost screamed. But I struggled to keep from making a sound, expressing my thanks to the man. The teacher saw this, from beginning to end kept a cold expression, buried his head and continued reading the document. The man wearing glasses immediately said softly, "What are you doing in a daze?" Quickly spread the word. I immediately transmitted the message, but I was still scared. This time I was just a hair away from fucking death. Seeing the knife slowly being passed, the man gently tapped the table with his index finger and said to me in a low voice, "Looks like my bet was right. There's no need to personally draw this knife. Just make the person being punished bleed." I couldn't help but admire his calmness, and unconsciously continued the topic. "Thank you for your help. My name is Lam Trong N. My name is Dick Sun." He nodded slightly. "Can you tell me which floors you went to in the last 2 classes?" "First and second floors," I replied. "What about you?" "First I observed along the way, so I went to the 4th floor. Then to the 2nd floor. And finally to the 3rd floor." He took a deep breath and looked at the words on the board. "I have an idea. I want to find someone to do it with. I wonder if you are interested in trying." To the man who was extremely calm, and had even saved my life, I thought it would be difficult for me to refuse his offer. "Please speak. The rules say that you can't have 2 classes on the same floor. Remember?" he said softly. "According to my guess, it's very likely that the rules of each class have remained unchanged, to prevent us from using the same rules to pass the level. That's why they require us to change floors." I pondered for a moment. Makes sense. So, the corner of his mouth curved into a smile. "We can exchange information. Tell each other what the classroom rules are on the 4th floor and the 1st floor respectively, steadily reducing the risk of 1 floor. How about that?" "No problem. The classroom is closest to the stairs on the 1st floor. The rule is that everyone must sit down 5 minutes early. Violators will be disqualified." "Oh, there's even this kind of rule." He was stunned after hearing this, then frowned. "Although it's extremely simple to do. As far as I know, when the first class starts, most people are in an observation mode, so they hesitate a lot." "That's right," I nodded. "The first class. Our probability of being eliminated in that class was relatively high. In the class of nearly 30 people. In the end, only 6 or 7 people survived." "Thanks for your intelligence. If no one had told you in advance, This kind of class would really be hard to guard against. He pushed up his glasses. My first class is in the third classroom on the left. After the stairs on the fourth floor. The rule is to stare at the teacher the entire time, and not look anywhere else. Then he asked with some worry. This is very challenging for a person's attention. After all, a class lasts for 40 minutes. Do you have any problems? Looking at his appearance, it seemed like he still remembered the story of me receiving the gift at this time. I took a deep breath. Don't worry. In the second period I also maintained a state for 40 minutes. I think I can handle it. Well then, hopefully after the fourth period, we can still meet. I hope so. This class looked very brutal, but with everyone calmly counting and helping each other. It reluctantly passed smoothly. There were 12 people left the classroom alive. However, everyone had some scars on their bodies, but they could still see sunlight in the hallway. I felt relieved, said goodbye to Dick's son and walked up the stairs to the fourth floor. Going up the stairs, entering the third classroom on the left, I settled down in a corner. After rubbing my eyes, I leaned against the window and kept looking at the white clouds in the distance, wanting to relieve the fatigue of my eyes. Anyway, the next challenge is to stare for 40 minutes. Then, 4 or 5 figures entered the classroom one after another. The loudspeaker also coldly announced the end of the previous class. After the third period ended, there were 130 students left in the school. Compared to the more than half chance of death in the previous 2 rounds, the number of the third round doesn't seem to scare people. After a quiet wait, the teacher finally stood up and wrote the rules on the blackboard. But after his chalk kept writing, I couldn't help but be stunned. What he wrote had nothing to do with what Dick's son said. It's not like, you have to stare at the teacher the whole class and don't look anywhere else, at all. I believe that if Dick's son wanted me to die, he would have just not saved me at that time. There is no way he could have used this deceitful trick to harm me. So to speak, our guess was wrong. Even in the same class, the rules of each lesson will not be the same. The rules of this class are the same as the previous class. It's all a game. The blind man touches the object. Classroom rules. During class, the blind man touching game must be played throughout the entire class. After class starts, the teacher will cover his eyes, and the students will have 5 minutes to hide in the classroom. After 5 minutes, the teacher will cover his eyes and search the classroom, and the student who is touched will be eliminated. Please note that the scope of this game is limited to the classroom, and anyone who steps out of the classroom will be eliminated. Waiting until the bell rang, the teacher took out a black handkerchief from his pocket and covered his eyes. I glanced at the 2 rays of sunlight shining through the back door in front of me, and discovered that this was the only time the classroom door did not automatically close. Those 2 doors were like 2 mouths full of blood, enticing students who had no way to escape to enter. One can imagine that if someone tried to avoid the teacher's search and walked out of this door, they would directly become a pile of blood and flesh splattered everywhere. I observed for a long time, but really couldn't find any easy place to hide in the classroom. So I had to use 2 tables and climb up to the top of the standing air conditioner. Luckily I'm not heavy, so I can barely sit up there. This place should be difficult to detect. More like once getting close, you can still jump to the ground, trying your best to increase the distance with the hope of escaping again. Not a bad hiding place. The 5-minute countdown ended. The teacher on the podium, who had been extremely silent, suddenly let out a strange smile and held out both hands. I held my breath. After the game started, I stared at the podium. Right at the teacher's feet, right below the podium, there was a young man with fair skin hiding. He was either a brave and talented person or wanted to prove that a dangerous place is the safest place, but he directly hid in the place closest to the teacher. If one were to think like an ordinary person, after having their eyes covered, they would probably really want to try searching forward, rather than paying attention to the space below their feet. Waiting until I find it will be a long time in the future. It's not a bad plan. It's just a pity that this blindfolded teacher is obviously not an ordinary person. The first place he looked was around himself. Everyone held their breath, looking at the teacher's two hands that were constantly reaching for the young man. Until the end was near, the young man could not hold back any longer, quickly slid a few steps, wanting to escape. Who would have thought that the teacher would block his way first? In his helplessness, he kept running back, backing up until he reached the door. In his panic, he accidentally put his left hand outside the door. Then a deafening alarm rang out, and he directly exploded on the spot, turning into a pile of flesh and blood. The curly-haired woman closest to him saw this scene and couldn't help but let out a frightened, "fuck" sound. Although it was only a very small sound, it was still caught by the teacher's sharp senses. The teacher's body was extremely strong. He clearly covered his eyes but was still able to quickly pass through the desks and pull the woman under the table out. Blood quickly splattered everywhere. The teacher's smile also became extremely cold. The corners of his lips almost spread to his ears. "Found you. Under the seat behind the water dispenser." It took less than 10 minutes, but the students who were hiding were found one by one. Even the fat kid hiding in the trash can is out of luck. The game has just started. Not even a third of the time has passed and more than half of it has been eliminated. Only I was left sitting on the air conditioner and a girl with a ponytail climbed up on the windowsill. The teacher also successfully completed the searching on the ground act, very intelligently searching the surrounding walls and windows. With his strong body and sharp senses combined with this no-nonsense search method, I found it hard to believe that the remaining two of us could easily complete the 40-minute test. This is clearly a fucking battle. Seeing the teacher getting closer and closer to the girl with the ponytail, I felt very worried. Suddenly the "re" was a sentence in it that caught my attention. Unless I can crawl up to the ceiling like Spider-Man, there's not much space in the classroom. I couldn't help but stare at the rules on the blackboard, silently reading them in my heart, wanting to calmly think like Dick's son. Suddenly there was a sentence in it that caught my attention. Suddenly a guess came to mind. I suddenly discovered that this game is not as unsolvable as I thought. I looked at the nervous ponytailed girl. She was gritting her teeth, frowning, her legs almost starting to shake. I quickly put my index finger to my mouth, signaling her not to make any noise. At the same time, I gently took off my uniform jacket and slowly rolled it into a pile. Just as the teacher was about to find the girl, I threw her out hard. The uniform rolled into a ball and quickly flew to the ground, rolling towards the back door. The teacher's hearing was very sharp. He immediately heard the location of this movement, quickly jumped over the desks and chairs and ran towards the uniform. Just as the uniform was about to roll out the door, he caught it. After realizing it was just a piece of clothing, he angrily tore it into shreds. But he was covering his eyes and didn't notice that his toes were already sticking out of the doorframe. Then the ear-piercing alarm bell rang, and the teacher turned into a pile of bloody pieces. The classroom was completely silent. There are 20 minutes left until school ends. Game. It's over soon. Are you sure the teacher won't show up again? The girl watched me jump down from the air conditioner. Then after casually sitting down, she also climbed down from the windowsill and sat next to me. He's already been blown up like that. Why aren't you at ease? I panted, turned my head and asked back. Finally, the girl nodded with relief. Thank you for saving me at the crucial moment. How did you come up with this idea? Pay attention. The rules say that anyone who steps out of the classroom will be eliminated. But it doesn't say that teachers aren't included. I pointed to the rules on the board. There's not enough time. If we let him continue searching like this, we'll definitely die. So why don't we just take a gamble and let him out? The girl suddenly understood, looked at the board and muttered to herself, pondered for a long time before finally sighing, turning her head and reaching out her hand. It's really lucky that you're here. My name is Kwang Tu Nok. I reached out my right hand and gently held her finger, Lam Trong En. This scene is so similar to when Dick's son saved me. It must be said that in such a difficult challenge, maintaining a calm mind is extremely important. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but look out the window. The thick fog blocked my vision. I didn't know what the situation was like at Dick's son on the first floor. The rules are not fixed. I'm afraid he also faces terrible dangers. Congratulations to those who survived the morning study session. After the fourth period ended, there were 60 students left in the school. The lunch I've been talking about for so long is finally here. The bell rang at the end of class, and a familiar voice came through the loudspeaker. The number of lucky people decreased from 222 to 60. It seemed that not only our place, the fourth period of every class was relatively dangerous. First, please invite students to sit on time in the cafeteria area on the 5th floor. The cafeteria doors are about to close and will not open again until evening. During lunch, the area outside the cafeteria will be subject to exclusion action, and those who have not entered the cafeteria will be placed in the school staff's dinner. I glanced at Zhang Ziyu beside me. The canteen is at the door. Let's go upstairs. I have to wait for someone at the stairs. Do you want to come with me? She nodded shyly. We walked side by side to the stairwell, staring intently at the spiral gap in the middle of the stairs. We waited about 10 minutes and finally saw that familiar pair of glasses. 5th floor cafeteria. Time is up. The door is officially closed. The area here is very large. There are many places. More than 1,000 tables and chairs are densely arranged here. It's just a pity that only 60 people can actually last until mealtime. The three of us found a small corner to quietly watch the canteen staff come and go. They kept bringing dishes to the table, even though they never filled it. Each table was always very full. But while they were serving up, I asked Dick's son, "We guessed wrong. The rules have changed. What happened on your side?" "My side is playing cards." Yi Shan glanced at Zhang Ziyu beside him. "There are only 3 people in the class. The main rule is to play a game of cards. A total of 10 rounds. The person with the highest score will survive. The rest will directly explode." Then he shrugged. "As you can see, my luck is not bad. It's just that there's a lot of blood on my face. It takes a while to clean it." I shook my head. It sounds like our side is more dangerous. After I finished talking about the classroom rules and the developments that followed, even Yi Shan couldn't help but be stunned. It sounds like this is a bloody battle. How can you survive, and even bring a girl out? The way to survive is in the rules. I sighed. I guessed that the rules said that anyone who crossed the line would be eliminated, including teachers, so I thought of a way to lure him out of the classroom. And luckily it worked. Hearing this, Yi Shan let out an "oh" and couldn't help but judge me, after discovering the rule change. "I was sweating for you. I didn't expect you to suddenly become so see-through. This detail really isn't easy to discover. But once you do, you can directly kill the F***ck of this game." While I was about to answer him, the loudspeaker's voice rang out, penetrating our ears. "Everyone, it's time to eat." School is a relatively humane place. In order to satisfy different eating habits, we specially make 3 different dishes. Of course, all the ingredients come from your classmates. Everyone has probably seen it with their own eyes. The first dish is a traditional Chinese dish, located on the east side of the canteen. It is just stir-fried meat with meat. Except for the seasoning, there are no side dishes, ensuring the purity of the meat dish. The second dish is a special Western dish, located on the west side of the canteen. The meat is cooked to different degrees. Sizzling, the aroma fills the nose. The cutlery is ready and can start at any time. The third dish is industrially cooked food, located in the middle of the canteen, all mashed, then shaped and steamed. The neat appearance is worthy of the name ham. The morning lessons are over. I'm sure you're all hungry. Please feel free to make yourself comfortable next time. The loudspeaker ended. I stared blankly at the so-called stir-fried meat with meat right in front of me. The uncomfortable feeling of wanting to vomit lingered in my throat and stomach. Dick's son was the one who looked the calmest among us. He looked at Kwang Tu Nok, who was frowning first, Do you want to eat? Zhang Ziyu quickly shook his head. No. No, I would rather starve. Then he looked back at me. Seriously, how can this thing be swallowed? I quickly waved my hand. Dick's son pouted. Okay, I don't want to eat either. After he finished speaking, he stood up and left the east side, went to the middle area, took 3 pieces of ham back, and divided 1 piece for each of us. I looked at him angrily. Didn't you say you didn't want to eat? Of course I don't want to eat. He stuffed the ham into his pocket, but being able to endure it now doesn't mean you can endure it forever. There are 4 classes left in the afternoon. Do you dare to guarantee that your physical strength is enough to persevere forever? Take it, even though it may not be useful. It will leave you a way to live. Living with a little nausea is better than dying. After hearing this, Zhang Ziyu and I couldn't help but feel dissatisfied, and quickly stuffed the piece of meat into our pockets. Dick's son went to the middle, where there were few people. Moreover, if we really limit ourselves to eating rice at lunch, then a combination of Western and Chinese food is enough. Why do we need to specially design a convenient dish? I'm afraid this ham isn't as simple as we imagine. Finally, the cafeteria door opened. After resting for an hour and a half, the 3 of us were in much better spirits and walked straight out of the stairs of the 5th floor. The whole road is negotiating what the rules will be in the future. After randomly choosing a classroom, 2 students quickly chose the 5th floor to enter. Time came. The teacher finally stood up from our attentive gaze, calmly picked up the chalk and began to write the rules. Classroom rules. This class has a bloody pen disguised as any object. Please find the bloody pen within the allotted time of class. Otherwise, all students will be eliminated. Each student only has 15 chances to touch the object. If all 15 attempts are used up and the student still cannot find the fountain pen, she will be eliminated. After writing the rules, the teacher turned back to his seat and began to silently read the lesson plan. This also means the official mission begins. Find a blood pen disguised as anything. Looking at the request on the blackboard, I was a bit confused. There are really too many things in the classroom. Even if everyone has 15 chances, it's still very difficult to find everything. The teacher on the podium coldly read the content of the lesson plan, making the passing of time seem very urgent. Standing still for about 5 minutes, no one dared to make a move. In the end, it was Dick's son who proposed first. Everyone, I have a suggestion. Everyone's eyes immediately gathered on him. There are a lot of things in the classroom. A fountain pen can transform into any object. He rubbed his chin, but generally speaking, we can divide it into 2 main categories. Those are quantity items and specialty items. He pointed at the tables. The tables and chairs are quantity items, and the others are specialty items. Zhang Ziyu tilted his head as if he didn't quite understand. What's the point of classifying them? Yi Shan looked at her. Of course it makes sense. The existence of this fountain pen is so that we can't find it. So its greatest characteristic is concealment. And for tables and chairs that look similar like this, the fact that they exist in large numbers is already a kind of concealment. Hearing this, I suddenly understood. That is to say, if we don't get rid of the disturbance of these tables and chairs, it will be very difficult for us to think about looking for other special items. That's right, Yi Shan nodded. Why don't we all work together and eliminate them together? The situation in this classroom will be much clearer. There are a total of 30 sets of desks and chairs here. Using 60 chances, we can eliminate all of them. Divide it equally between each person and get 12 chances. I agree. After carefully checking all the tables and chairs, we all felt a little regretful. The blood pen is not hidden in them. But this can also make us easily eliminate speculation with the table and chairs. All our minds are placed on the special item standing alone. Now a person has only 3 chances left. If we want to eliminate our fascination with similar objects, then what is hidden in these independently existing objects? This is still the earliest idea that Dick's son proposed. The fountain pen should have an important characteristic, which is to be ignored. Ignore? I muttered this trait, carefully glancing around. Finally got my guess. The top of the head is the most easily neglected place. After finding a table to climb on, I touched the 2 electric fans on the ceiling. Unfortunately, none of them are the legendary fountain pens. I lost all interest, left with only one last chance. If I touch anything other than a fountain pen, I will immediately explode. I looked towards Dick Sun and Kwang Tu Nok, hoping that I could only place my hope on them. Without waiting for them to make a move, the other 2 students in the classroom couldn't wait and started using their imaginations. One of them uses chalk to write the rules on the board to write on. Things that involve rules are easily overlooked by others. Unfortunately, he guessed wrong. The other person found 2 extremely small pieces of trash up there, which were really easy for us to overlook in terms of area. But he was wrong too. Zhang Ziyu thought for a long time, then placed his hand on the important objects of a classroom, the glass door and the air conditioner. Unfortunately, all are wrong judgments. But Dick Sun was the one we placed all our hopes on. After thinking for a long time, he stared at the clock on the podium and the blackboard. Everyone had their last chance, but the fountain pen was still missing. The 5 of us took a deep breath together without prior arrangement. Time is only 10 minutes left. In each person's hand there is only one last chance left. Flower pots in the last row, trash cans in the corner of the classroom, books stacked on the desks, teaching rulers dropped on the podium, propaganda posters hung on both walls, chairs under the teacher's butt, brooms and mops dropped in front. The remaining things are not just 5 types. Once you find the wrong one, you will never be able to return. We kept observing the item that was there, thinking about the negligent characteristic that Yi Shan spoke of. Obviously all the items were already within our sight, but what was the one that was most easily overlooked? Seeing time slowly passing, when there were only 5 minutes left, one of the guys couldn't help but take action and immediately touched the bottom of the chair where the teacher had been sitting. Then suddenly it exploded. All the blood and flesh splattered on the teacher who was reading the lesson plan. His expression did not change and he continued reading naturally. I don't know when a feeling of despair has enveloped all of us. Time ticked away and it was down to the last minute. In everyone's mind, there is constant comparison, wanting to choose the target at the last moment. With the current situation, I'm afraid we can only gamble. Another lucky guy who couldn't keep calm first spoke his mind, I think. All the things that are easy to ignore can actually be understood as the things that are easiest to eliminate in our eyes. Then he walked over to the trash can. If everyone had to choose from these items, I'm afraid they would all eliminate the trash can that is both smelly and big. And very visible, right? So I think that's where the fountain pen is hidden. Having said that, he immediately tried to smash the trash can. Boom! There was a loud bang and he turned into a pool of blood. But after he died, Zhang Ziyu, who was beside me, suddenly woke up, saw that there were only 20 seconds left, so she quickly walked towards the podium. I figured it out. In the classroom there is something that is the easiest to hide, the easiest for us to ignore, and will absolutely be eliminated by us the first time we enter. It has all the characteristics to hide from us. After saying that, she gently walked up to the podium and grabbed the teacher who was still reading the lesson plan. But the teacher turned into a fountain pen that she held tightly in her hand. Just then the bell rang. Your analysis really gave me a different perspective. Walking out of the classroom, even the always calm Dick Sun couldn't help but be continuously surprised. In his eyes, perhaps Zhang Ziyu was a foolish, cowardly girl, but at the most important moment, she jumped out of the blindfold of the rules to choose the right target. Zhang Ziyu's cheeks turned red as she pointed at me. It was Brother Lin who gave me the suggestion. Because in the 4th period, he took advantage of the rules to kill the F***ck of the teacher. That's when I dared to include the teacher in the hidden range of the fountain pen. While we were laughing and talking happily after surviving the ordeal, we went up to the 6th floor and heard a loud loudspeaker blaring. After the fifth period ended, there were 16 students left in the school. The school, which used to be filled with people everywhere, now had only a few people. As for the entire sixth floor, from beginning to end there were only the three of us in sight. We entered the classroom and sat there with difficulty waiting for the teacher to stand up and write the rules. But every time the teacher wrote another word, Dick's sons and my eyebrows furrowed a little more. Because that rule looks awfully familiar. Classroom rules. During the lecture in this class, the entire process of passing the flower drum must be carried out. After the class begins, the teacher will give a knife to the student closest to the podium, who can choose any direction to continue passing the flower. The teacher lowers his head to lecture, inviting the students to continue passing the flower, not stopping for more than 3 seconds. When the teacher's voice stops, when raising his head, the person holding the knife must within 3 seconds make a cut on himself. Otherwise he will be eliminated. This is the rule of the third period. So it happened again on the sixth floor. Even though we had already gone through this mission, Dick's son and I still couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. What a joke. During the third period, there were nearly 20 people in the class. On average, each person got 5 or 6 lines. The unlucky ones got more than 10 lines, but they barely passed. But now there are only 3 of us in the class. If we divide it equally like that, each person will have at least 50 or 60 lines drawn on their body. This knife looks normal but is quite sharp and can draw a lot of blood. 5 or 6 blows were enough for me to endure. What is the concept of 5 or 60 blows? It's no different than a direct death sentence. If I face this rule alone, isn't that like self-torture? After Zhang Ziyu read the rules, he looked at the knife handed over by the teacher and his arm couldn't help but tremble a little. She nervously squeezed the corner of my shirt. What should Mr. Lam do? I could only simply comfort her with a few words, then looked back at Dick's son behind me. But Dick's son also frowned like that, his expression serious. The teacher obviously didn't give us a chance to think. After sitting down, he directly handed the knife to me. The game has begun. Following the rules given in the previous class, I raised my finger and silently counted to 2, then passed the knife to Dick's son behind me. Dick's son also used a similar method to bring the sword to Zhang Ziyu's hand. Seeing us demonstrate one by one, Kwang Tu Nok immediately understood the pre-arranged rules between us, so he imitated our movements and then returned the knife to me. Just as I received the letter, the teacher suddenly stopped teaching and raised his head. I quickly drew a line on my arm. Fresh blood flowed out. The teacher satisfiedly bowed his head and continued teaching. I breathed a sigh of relief, and the cycle began again. Just after passing it around twice, the letter had just reached Zhang Ziyu's hands when the teacher raised his head again. Zhang Ziyu had the same reaction as me at first, and couldn't help but be stunned. I quickly snatched the shirt from her hand, drawing a line down her snow-white arm. Fresh blood immediately flowed out. She almost screamed. Tears continuously flowed from her eyes. But in the end she still gritted her teeth to endure the pain. After the teacher bowed his head, he put the knife back into my hand. My heart could not help but sink. The probability of a teacher stopping to look up from a lecture seems to be much higher than that of a teacher in the third period. If this continues, Zhang Ziyu will not be able to bear it for another 5 minutes. After continuously going through several rounds like this, the 3 of us inevitably had a few lines on our bodies. I heard Dick's son's tapping speed on the table getting faster. Obviously he was also constantly thinking about how to survive in the rules of the flower-beating drum. The 3 players of this game were simply torture. After I took out the card, my eyes were still locked on the words on the rule, my mind constantly rearranging them from the beginning. While I was scratching my scalp until it was about to tear, I suddenly noticed a certain word in the rule. It seems a bit like the blind man touching the statue in the 4th period. After entering the class, the teacher will give a stick to the student closest to the podium, which can continue to transmit in any direction. Any direction. My eyes seemed to light up. This is definitely not a surefire fight. Wait until I received the knife that Zhang Ziyu brought again. I suddenly stood up and placed it on the teacher's desk. The teacher's direction also falls within the range of any direction. He was lecturing when he suddenly stopped, his face blank as he raised his head to look at me. I made a dangerous move and it didn't explode. Obviously, I bet right. 3 seconds later, the still dazed teacher had turned into a pile of mixed flesh and blood. It's over. The drum in the flower drumming game is no longer there, and the flower has no meaning to continue being passed on. Zhang Ziyu, who had a stubble on her hand, finally couldn't hold back her emotions and immediately fell on me, leaning on my shoulder and sobbing. Seeing the thick fog outside the window, I finally let out a sigh and gently patted her shoulder. Turning back, I saw Dick's son also smiling comfortably at me like that. Congratulations on being alive and being able to continue listening to the lecture. After the 6th period ended, there were 7 students left in the school. That's a really grim number. The voice on the loudspeaker seemed to have a hint of mockery. The 3 of us carefully cleaned our wounds in the corner restroom and supported each other as we went up to the 7th floor. By the time we were seated, the bell for preparation had already rung in the air. The teacher stood up and wrote the rules. What catches the eye is no longer the 4 words, classroom rules, that are constantly repeated. But it was the first time that change happened. The school's unified rule: teachers continuously lecture for a day, consuming a huge amount of energy. The staff meal at lunch is not enough to fill their stomachs. Students are invited to personally give the teachers a portion of ham in return for their hard work. Those who cannot give will be eliminated from the game. Seeing these words, I couldn't help but touch the ham in the bag. Yi Shan's judgment? It was truly too miraculous. Ham is a convenient food that stands out between Western and Chinese food, and there is indeed a difference. I couldn't help but sigh. This is Saturday class. It's really a bit dramatic. Simply put, it's just a matter of bringing along a portion of ham. It's hard to say. If I hadn't thought of this scene 2 hours ago, I would have definitely faced death. Congratulations on surviving. You can enter the last class. Unfortunately, after the 7th period ended, there were only 3 students left in the school. We went up to the 8th floor together and entered a classroom. Hearing the fake regretful announcement, we also knew the current situation. That's right, the whole school was completely left with only the 3 of us. Now the 8th floor in essence is a real island. But what we didn't expect was that when we entered the classroom, there were no desks, no blackboard, and no teacher. But it is 3 separate rooms. The loudspeaker came on and he explained the rules to us. The last lesson is the choice of the heart. Everyone else will be gathered in a classroom to play this game. Of course, the 3 of them had gathered together and were already very familiar with each other's names, saving a lot of steps. The 3 private rooms each have a writing area. You need to go into one of those rooms and write down a name. This name could be the name of a person present here. After the 3 of you have finished writing, all the characters whose names are on the paper will be killed on the spot. Believe me, this is absolutely the most meaningful lesson out of the 8 lessons. Each person is the judge to decide life and death. School life repeats itself day after day. Students come in groups after groups, to the point where it is impossible to count. The number of people who can make it to the final stop every day is extremely small. When there are few, there are 1 or 2 people. When there are many, there are only 5 or 6 people. And the highest survival record ever is 3 people. Of course, there are only 3 of you in total. Even if you all write the same name, at most 2 of you can only survive. Alright, next please go to your private room. Please be careful not to discuss or debate about the person you choose. Otherwise I will remove your rights to enter the room and directly kill you. Let's test your hearts that have gone through countless hardships. Especially the kind of small team that helps. Coming here together like you guys. The final choice really makes people excited. Sounds like a surefire fight. Furthermore, we cannot discuss the chosen person in advance, so it is also impossible to write one's own name to volunteer to be the sacrificed person. If everyone was so in tune, they would have been wiped out. But I'm not panicking right now. On the contrary, before entering the room, he smiled with satisfaction and asked Yi Shan, your observations are the most meticulous. Tell me, have you ever seen the name of this school? Why do you ask this? Even if you were to shit here, you would know what the cemetery is called, right? This morning when I woke up, I tilted my head to look over. This place is called the Red Blood Academy. Oh, really? I was very interested and raised my lips. The two of them looked at me and suddenly looked at each other and smiled at me. Entering the room, I picked up a pen without hesitation and wrote my choice. Red Blood Academy. The classroom suddenly started shaking violently. I quickly crawled out of the room. The two of them were normal. Sure enough, they got what I meant. Seeing that the classroom was in great danger, we quickly ran downstairs. This was the first time I crawled out of the rubble. But it took a long time to pull Zhang Ziyu and Yishan out of the rubble. Luckily, no one was seriously injured because they were buried on the edge. Faced with the final test, none of us wanted to make the cruel choice. So under my deliberate guidance, everyone finally made a big bet. On paper you can write all the characters there, but it doesn't seem to determine whether the school itself is a character or not. Having caught so many loopholes in the rules along the way, what's the point of catching one last time? At worst, all three of them would die together, but it would be impossible to find the one who died the most peacefully. As it turned out, we were right. This strange school that had probably existed for a long time finally collapsed. We breathed in the fresh air, watching the dense, shoreless clouds hovering overhead. In a world without a soul, there is only an empty road, not knowing where to go. But we still walked with our heads held high, side by side on that road, looking forward with no destination in sight. Although I don't know what the foggy shore will be like, the horror of the school is finally completely over. Run out of. That's the end of the story. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our future stories.